right, can folks hear me online?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. So wanted to have a little bit of time to see if there's any discussion, any thoughts or comments from our time yesterday. Anything anybody wanted to go back and check in on, or any epiphanies last night as we were putting ourselves in a meat coma over barbecue? Did you just like dump everything last night over cocktails? Anybody online have any questions or comments about some of our discussions yesterday? Okay.
Ready to go.
Ready to go. So that's good. Okay, so what we wanted to do today, we want to have a little conversation about FireCode and unique record identifier, and this kind of came up at the summit in the fall, and I think Steve Larrabee kind of introduced just asked the question, you know, are we utilizing, I mean, is FireCode working for us? Is there opportunity to do something different with it? What would that look like? I think John or Shannon, you know, probably we're looking at some technical refresh opportunity for FireCode coming up. And so being able to kind of be clear about what opportunities might exist with that. And so that was really the point of the conversation. At the time, last fall, Dave Burley, who's the DUI business lead for FireCode, was like, no, I don't want to have this conversation. And then, but he's since come back and he and I've talked about it. And he's like, yeah, you know, it probably makes sense for us to just talk about it and see, you know, it's been around for a while, and maybe there's some ways that we could use it that we hadn't thought about at the time. And so that was really the point of it. So I don't know, Steve, if you want to kind of kick it off, that would be awesome. If you remember your thoughts back then. I thought I saw him. Yeah, there he is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's nothing too complicated. I haven't really prepared anything, but the bottom line is that FireCode began, I believe, in fiscal year 2005. So the very, very first FireCode, which is like AAA1 or A001, I'm not sure which, issued by the Great Basin Smoke Jumpers of all groups. That happened on October 1st, 2004. And so, we're in the P's now, with our four character code. So, we're barely past halfway through the alphabet, but just in terms of the time elapsed, it's been, it's been a significant number of years, particularly for any kind of technology. The FireCode application, I think, has served us well, although, like so many things we do, it's had kind of a crisis of identity. Is that in fact a physical code, or is it a unique fire identifier? And can those two things coexist in the same, string of data? And so, those are the kinds of things that weigh on my mind. The application itself, I think, and this is no ding on the the keepers of the application, but just in terms of its sophistication and capabilities, I think it's certainly one of our more geriatric and least capable applications that are in the integrated environment. So we've had, in my opinion, a number of accommodations over the years for Irwin that had to be made to basically work within the limitations of what FireCode could do, or couldn't do, perhaps might be the better way to put that. So, but the dependency on the FireCode itself is huge, as Kara and others have pointed out over the years. The difficulties in say in a final fire report of going back and changing a FireCode. I mean, it just blows up all kinds of things upstream, and users get pretty excited about those kinds of things. But as the Inform group and others have noted, through the evolution of an incident, particularly when incidents merge, but even individual incidents, there are all kinds of good reasons why multiple fire codes could have been issued over the course of the incident, particularly in the early phases when things were just getting sorted out. So, the idea that there could be multiple relevant fiscal codes or relevant fiscal code keys that insert into agency fiscal strings for a single incident, I think is a lesson that we've learned. So all of those things kind of just, rumble through my head. And, here we are 20 years down the line, essentially. So it just seems like it'd be a good time to talk about what's next, and whether that's a fiscal thing or a fire identifier thing or both, and whether that's something that's primarily intended to serve the federal agencies or perhaps can be intended to accommodate all of the agencies, state and locals even. I think those are all great topics for discussion and report.
Thanks, Steve. Laura, I don't see Dave on yet, so I think that makes you the de facto FireCode business lead.
It does, but I didn't know or have any idea that we were going to speak on this topic. So that shows how much I scanned through the agenda, but not to see what I was going to talk on. Is Dave on it or John's on? I know that the code for fire, it's on its last leg. So I'm all about upgrading it, changing it. I know that we had a study done on what it provides for us, what we get out of it. So I think we have the information we need if we did want to go to something else. I know John's had those conversations, but I'd be all for it. I know that it would take more than just the business people. It would be the financial systems that connect to it that would have to be brought into the conversation.
Yeah, I think I'll channel John, and he's going to say it does more than just issue a code, right? There's connectivity.
It does,
and
yeah.
sharing of data with the financial systems that we'd have to think about. But I guess, setting that aside, right? So recognizing that we can work through some of those technical issues, we can have conversations. I think that this, the EMS conversation at the end of the day yesterday, there's a relationship to this, right? So the part of that conversation about the Viper EMS contract is we have standards, right? And we want those partners that we work with to utilize our standards. And so, we've kind of like defaulted to FireCode as a standard. But the methodology that FireCode uses to get information they have two different methodologies that they're managing right now, right? Depending on the agency that they're sharing data with. And so, maybe part of what we need to do is kind of look at, do we need to have a standard that describes this better? But I think the other question that I've had, and I know we've had some conversations from the fuel side about, a need for a unique identifier as well. And I've had people ask me, well, why can't we just use a FireCode? And it's like, well, because FireCode was really about wildfire, not other things. And so is that, that was like Steve said, that was sideboards that we put in place 20 years ago. Do we need to look at those as well? So I think there's several opportunities to think about this. So I'm curious to hear kind of like Beth.
Well, let's do the same thing. But I do have a strong opinion about this, and I actually don't think FireCode is the way to go. I think you add a year to the incident number, and then it is unique.
And so does that mean like you think that we could get rid of eliminate FireCode completely?
No.
Oh, no, okay.
No, FireCode still needs to be there, but it's definitely a federal assignment. I mean, some incidents never get a FireCode.
Right.
Because they're either not a wildfire or they're completely state or local or something, and they don't need one because nobody's supporting them. And so I don't think it's appropriate to use a financial code that's only used by some systems as a unique identifier. And I get what you're saying, but I think really the simple answer is I mean, the incident number is unique each year, but then we have duplicates year after year. But if you add the year to either the front or the back of that, then it becomes unique.
And I think that this is part of the struggle that Steve and I and others that were on the forest task group had with the unique identifier standard that we have, because it's a concatenation of the year, the
It actually doesn't include the year right now, right?
unique fire identifier does. Yeah, so it's the year, it's a protecting unit, and then that local
Yeah.
identifier. And we kind of had to put all of those together because that local identifier,
People
you know,
use that differently.
well, and across different dispatch centers and agencies, that, 00001 is going to be duplicated. So we had to,
Right, but it
like,
always has a unit.
so if it has the unit ID in front of it, but I think the discomfort that we've had with that is, we know those change, right? And so it's like, it's not this really stable thing from the beginning all the way to the end. And that's part of what
I would agree with you. So the fire codes. Fire codes have been changed on incidents or taken off or moved. So I would say that argument is the same.
yeah,
I would also say too, that part of our task group this year had a proposal for that unique fire identifier that would have the unique fire identifier. And yes, during that, what we found with our data, the first 48 hours, there were some changes, right? We think it's state fire, no, it's forest, et cetera. So there were some changes in that protection, protecting unit ID. Part of what we found when we pulled out all the analytics is that we locked that in for reasons that we know about, right? For reasons, I think, what did Steve say, that the users are uncomfortable with it. It's not even so much that they're uncomfortable with it. It is, they have pending financial obligations and associations with that for, resource ordering, payments, et cetera. And so one of the things that that group proposed, and we'll talk about it on Thursday, but they proposed to lock that in after 5 days, $120. And so, however, if the change to the protecting unit would happen later, although our data said that's very rare, that it's after that. But if it would happen, then that protecting unit would update, but that unique fire identifier would remain the same. And so, so all of those documents that are eventually going to be associated with those payments, et cetera, would have that unique fire identifier, but we would know actually, yes, but here's the actual post a flag to indicate that they're not equal. I agree with Beth. It feels like we're trying to use an application that's a financial application to solve for something else. With the unique fire identifier.
Yeah.
And then I think that, like you said, that we also have multiple incidents that have the same fire code.
That's true.
For the example, and then we have the ones that start with ABC and this and then get unique. And so I think the conversation is always good to reflect and just see if there's places where we might reevaluate how we're using it. It just might not be the right place.
yeah, I think one of the things that we have to maybe we have to consider in our structure is the point that we do have multiple fire codes, right? And I think that's, I don't know that I think we know that reality exists, but we haven't really designed to it in the data in being able to easily reflect that. And so there's probably some opportunity there for us to think about, like, how do we actually handle these instances where there are multiple fire codes, and really, so that we can truly understand that.
I wonder too, from an IDA's perspective, there's some people that probably definitely, oh, sorry, Lauren.
No, keep going.
That probably would know this way better than I do. But I think in those instances, other than when we had, an ABCD miss that then needs to get a unique fire code. when there are two, there's usually an issue. If there's something wrong, there's trying to bend two, right? And so when we think about those relationships that we're working on for conflict detection resolution, one ignition, et cetera, there really should only be one. And then even like with complexes, when a fire is using the complex fire code instead of their own, those are those things that aren't correct, right? That cause incident business challenges when they're trying to understand the costs associated with the incident.
Well, I'm sorry, Laura was up first.
I'm in agreement with both of you on, I don't think the fiscal code is the way to go. And part of that is because it's, yes, we do have consistent data all the way back to a certain point, but because of the way that we use the fiscal codes in relationship to the incidents, I think you're gonna have trouble splitting out. You're gonna end up with multiple incidents related to that same fiscal code. And it's not just, while it's not the easy to see one where it's the ABCD miss. The Forest Service rolls over support codes, multiple fire support codes each year. So you have multiple costs that are out there, E5XJ. I mean, I know it because they roll it over year after year after year. And so you're going to have multiple annual costs that are associated with each support order, which you can tell the support orders apart because they have unique incident identification numbers, especially when they're associated with a year, but you can't tell them apart based on that fiscal code.
And the workload for dispatchers, if they have to pull a fire code for every single ABC miss fire, we're gonna get huge. And that's why they lump them. That's why they create one each year. For that reason. And then there's so many incidents that don't have a fire.
But is it really, I mean, isn't it just like push the button and get a fire
Well,
code?
now it sends it, yeah, but I mean, it's still another step you have to take, or another box you have to check and track. And it used to be, those are all, I mean, now they're all lumped, they're all charged to one account. And that was actually at the direction of our financial folks, because they don't want to break it out either. They have to track each one of those and pay them. They want to do all those small fires. They don't want, I do think you need to pull it, if you are going to use the financial code, you do have to pull in incident business and make them part of this conversation, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Dave had some conflicts. And he hasn't made it
I
yet,
do
so.
think too, though, and I don't want to put on another rabbit trail though, but just even listening to Lauren talk, right, that there is, she highlights a really good point, and there is financial codes and there are fire codes, and they might not be the same. Like a financial code, you have a state fire code, right? And that's one of those things that we're talking, even we mentioned the other day.
Fire code.
Yeah. So.
Can you say that again, Beth?
Pre-position orders don't get a fire code.
No, they get their.
They have their agency.
Designated
financial
agency
codes, yeah.
code. That's rolled over like the support codes.
Yeah. So they're the same code
And
year
they're,
after year after year, and you're telling them apart by these.
and they were issued by fire code by building, years and years and
Yeah,
years and years.
They're in the E series, we're in the P now, so what was it?
Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah, I have, like, I guess my thought in that has always been like, if you have a fire code that you lump and you put stuff in year after year after year after year, I mean, like, you're, doesn't that make it harder to understand the actual cost? I mean, wasn't that the whole point, is that we could?
Yes, it does.
He has his hand up.
Yeah, Steve?
Sorry about that. I'm chatting Burley, his light screen, so we'll see if we can get him over here. So
Okay.
I think it was Lauren, or it might have been Beth, but whoever just said, there's perhaps a fire code and then a fiscal code. I think that's the essence of the matter. I mean, if really what we're and all the stuff Kara just said about, potential problems with the so-called unique fire identifier changing over time because, you know, the protecting unit portion in the middle was subsequently discovered to be different. You know, I think the gist of this is, do we really want some assuredly unique shorthand notation to identify incidents, which, because it is assuredly unique and it is handy, could very easily be inserted into a fiscal string to become a fiscal code, you know, pertaining to a particular incident. And to me, that has been the problem from day one, was that, you know, fire code is, you know, it's short and it's handy, and in most cases it's unique. You know, we still wanted to divine some intelligence from the unique incident identifier, but you know, those things can coexist as separate pieces, and if they're served up and readily available for every incident, you know, people can consume those and they can be, you know, maintained in their own respective data fields and kept accurate over time. So, you know, this idea of maybe this really wasn't a fiscal thing at all, but it was rather an incident identifier that, you know, could be used in a fiscal string, I think is really the gist of this for me.
I mean, and I realize this is machine intelligence, not human intelligence, but wasn't all that the idea behind Otter, the urban ID, et cetera, but that's really good.
Well, I think the thing is that a GUID is such an obnoxious thing for a human to interact with, right?
I
So,
realize it's not human.
yeah, and so we have to balance how humans interact and identify things with those machine ones. And yes, the machines can, by using those series of unique IDs, you know, be able to understand what to do with different parts of the data. But for the humans that then get to look at it, like, unless they're willing to look at the code and the metadata that tells you what the machine did with it and why, which we know that's not going to happen, right? So we have to, I mean, we can't get people to read the instructions on like how to use the NIPSI open data site, you know?
Yeah.
More than a paragraph, it's,
3-minute read.
yeah, 3 minutes.
So yeah, there were some things captured from that task group as well, right? As far as available and having that available on a product or a report, et cetera. Quick reference for a human. You can get most of it right up there, but opens right down at the bottom. And yeah, this is the fodder and this is the urban association, and it is more.
So Kara, remind me, I loved that you pulled data. Like, yay.
I'm taking it a credit as answer again.
So that, was it 5 days?
We did 120 hours, 5 days.
Okay,
What we did though, is we ran it, from 0 hours to a year, basically, and looked over the data in between and what, I can't remember what we saw, I don't have it, but over 50% that had changes were resolved within the first 24 to 48 hours. It never changed again. Then we had the outliers, the ones that, you know, took more time. And you know, I think Jill Liganici talks about one that she was a year after the fact, and we know those are the case. What we were trying to address was some of those user stories behind it and the need to have, we were talking about data exchange, right? And what could solve some of our issues that we're seeing and trying to look at it objectively in that way. That all of those instant business piece, FOIA pieces that would have to happen after the fact, we wouldn't have to explain the data, it would have that consistency associated with it, but yet metadata, the protecting unit ID itself. We looked at protecting unit ID. Obviously, your wasn't a big thing. We looked at the unique fire identifier and all that data elements that needed it. Year and jurisdiction, because that, or not year, name and jurisdiction. That seemed to be the biggest concerns from the community, which was narrowed down to those tiny little bits. Did I answer your question? Sorry, I know I got kind of.
yeah, no, I was just, it was wanted a reminder about, the time and how many were adjusted after that time. And so I think it was like,
89% was within that 5 days.
Okay.
which we're looking for 85%.
Yeah. I think what that means though is that if we continue to use that pattern for a unique identifier, there's this sense of assumed intelligence in that unit ID component of it that, 15% of the time isn't going to be true.
Flag.
Yeah.
There's an indicator. I hear you. We feel like we have something to present for the community to say, okay, well, that still doesn't solve, and we can fix and pick it apart and make those kinds of changes for those concerns, right, that are still there, because of course it's not perfect, otherwise we would have solved it years ago. Yeah. Bring that up.
Okay. Anybody online have anything they want to add?
BJ here out of Minnesota. I just threw some stuff in chat if people want to peruse it, and I didn't. I apologize for coming in late and not getting the whole thing. I understand the uniqueness of it, but on the other side of the coin, it's kind of a who, what, when, where is kind of what we're going for when we talk about finances. Who did what, when, and where, and maybe takes a little time to distill backwards to what it's really about, or what the opportunities maybe. I'm not saying you throw everything out, but are the previous assumptions of the systems when they were built still valid?
Right, are they?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
are they overcome by extent? Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, no, I think this is the time for us to have, if we think that there's something that we want to do different, this is the time. I think Lauren, and then I'll go to Shannon.
And this is, I'm not IBA, and this is just looking at something from the Forest Service perspective. But I was kind of looking at how they define when a fire code should be pulled. And their perspective is that they've got a criteria of whether a fire even qualifies to get a fire code. Otherwise, it's automatically going to end up in the ABCD miss. And part of that is expected reimbursement and cost share as a requirement. And then when you go back and you look at the criteria for the each land-based unit will have one code for ABCD miscellaneous fires. It's of course the initial response to wildfires. It also includes all false alarms and mutual aid. So there's the potential for a lot of duplicity within that system for some of these other records, based on how we've historically been using it, because they haven't changed this language in these aspects for some time.
Yeah, and so the direction from our financial system came 20 years ago. Maybe things have changed for them too, right? So it probably is worth asking at that point in time. So Shannon?
Yes, hello. So the only thing I really am going to say, I'm going to let John, he knows more about the specifics of the application, obviously, but we know it's in, cold fusion, old technology. We do have plans to stabilize FireCode. And I would say that, as we look at any application, definitely we want to go back to the business and say, what is it that the business needs? And let that drive how the new application would be done. But yeah, it's definitely on our list for a stabilized new version. We've just had other applications that have needed it more. We've been able to keep FireCode limping along, but we definitely understand and realize that it needs to be put into a new environment. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks. John?
So yeah, there's a couple things. Actually, I'll put an asterisk on what Shannon was just saying there. That's as a result of, so a year ago, actually, we proposed to rewrite it. We were going to, and we had the staffing to do it, but our processes, our interagency processes kind of derailed that. So we're still waiting just to get that initial approval. So anyways, that doesn't help us here. There was a couple things. So I think that the putting it together with a unique identifier, I think they're only more loosely related than directly related. I think Steve may have been onto something, is that maybe one can be the subset of the other or represented in the other, but and it can change, but I believe the original intent was truly for the feds to be able to respond to Congress and say, when they said, how much are you spending on these suppression dollars? Or how much, how much are you spending, to put out these fires, and what exactly, give us some numbers and do those pieces. So that's different than every state system. And we know that every state system, there's no way the people would, the states would always accept a single number just because of their own bureaucracies. They have their own ways of tracking costs. So at least that was the genesis of it. So if it changes, then that's fine. Then the business should be able to do that. But at least to initially meet that initial need of being able to track those, that's what it's been functioning for. I'll also just toss out that it's actually had REST services going for, I think, almost 10 years. So when we say it's using old technologies, REST is old, but actually the FBMS and IBDB both have leveraged the REST services. I think it's close to 10, maybe 7 years, because they fought it really initially. We used to have an enterprise service bus that served all that and then we created the services when we did one of our refreshes. And ironically, the Forest Service fought it and brought up you have to give us 2 years notice because of investment processes, and we're not going to change. And then they had a break on their end and ended up using the REST services over a weekend, and we're back up Monday, and we never used the bus again. But that's just how the world works. When it's something you want, of course you're going to support it. When it's when it's change, you're not. So anyways, it's ironically, it's a really simple concept of a system. It's done it for 20 years, and it's kind of funny that we thought it was going to run out 5 times over the time. Oh my God, there's no way 4 digits, and hex can do it, and yet we're just about halfway through after 20 years. It was never intended to be a unique identifier, that's for sure. I mean, because like I say, you don't do a 4-digit code that's hex to be that, but it was to just be find that code so that we could at least track costs and report against costs to be able to do that. So like I said, it does what it does simply, and it does those. And like I say, there's other capabilities, and you guys have mentioned it. It's used for what's it when we move around our resources before the fire season. We pull it for move people to Arizona. I can't believe I'm spacing the stupid name for that. Anyways, prepo, but also I used to say it was the drug of the fire community, because severity. There you go. They pull it for severity. Sorry, thank you, Steve. But they pull it for those things. It's also they pulled them. There's manual contingencies. So everyone has a little book of contingencies so that if all systems are down, and then like I say, the connectivity to those financial systems. But it does what it does. But if it needs to change from the business side, then I think it should. But like you say, without chatting with the financial systems, I think there'll be big issues. So it'll take us a little while to figure out who on that end. A lot of times for us, when it's working, it's great. And then we don't have contacts that always live and breathes on those, because we're just such a small little piece of their big pies. But anyways, I don't want to ramble on.
Okay.
So I just put up the data, so you had it. So that's
Yeah.
88%.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good.
It's also of note that 15,000, so of 236,377 incident records, the unique fire identifier changed in 15,000 of those, but in actual fact, it's more like 11,000 because duplicates within one.
Okay.
So, so it's certainly not zero, but at the same token, statistically speaking, it's a small amount, but it's causing us issues, right?
Yeah.
That we've got issues associated with it, but, you know, it's notable, 55% are changed in the first hour, that's what we'll get there.
Okay.
Michelle?
No.
So, I mean, in our data, dispatchers are probably using these codes inaccurately as well. For example, Lion's Head was a Warm Springs agency fire. But yet, the Willamette, right next door, up to a year and a half later, we're creating separate incidents for rekindles using the Lion's Head BIA's code for their rekindles up to a year and a half later. And so I don't know if they had the authority to, or is that the right way to use the fire code, but they were using that same fire code for Lion's Head in 2020, all the way up until December of 2021, or they called it Lion's Head rekindling. So who knows if they, should they have done that? You know, up to a year and a half later, I don't know. Yes, there's like 12 incidents that they've created the following year, up to a year and a half later, using that same Warm Springs agency fire code.
And that speaks to this need for relationships between all these incident records, right? So that in those cases, when that does happen, that agency administrator can have that true cost. It goes back to all the in support of garbage that people have been building for years. And anyway, we might be coming at it from the wrong angle, but the issue is there.
Laura's been some.
Yeah, Laura?
Dave is on that.
Hi, Dave.
I was gonna say that, as far as the ABCD miss, I know Mark Lichtenstein asked me probably 5 years ago if we could go to a unique fire code for those smaller fires, and I said, sure, why not? Which he was surprised, I would say, but I know the limitation originally was on the financial system side, not on fire code. So it's still, I mean, it should be doable. Geez, we're in 2023. So I don't even think that's really a question. I mean, we can always create support codes for those miscellaneous things. We're working on multiple fires at the same time, especially dispatchers. We could cover it that way, but mostly what I raised my hand for was to say that Dave's on with us now.
Hi, Dave.
Hello, sorry. I had hoped to know ahead of time when we were talking about this, so sorry about that.
No worries. I know you've been pulled in lots of different directions.
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah. Kara?
I was gonna say that I wonder if part of the issue too is the fact that right now, the connection to Forest Service financial systems through FireCode is manual, right? That there's issues there. And that might be causing some challenges when we look at a refresh. That might be something to consider as well. Like on the DOI systems, when there's a change to the financial system, when there's a change to the fire code, that's read and that's updated. And then Dave or Laura would have to explain this probably better than me, or somebody from Albuquerque. But they literally, when that happens, they have to create another record. So they truly have to create a duplicate within their financial system when there's been a change. And that's why to validate those changes, there's a phone call, there's an IBA or whoever's in charge for that area who has to reach out, and that probably gets missed on occasion, right? There's going to be some issues behind it. So I wonder, as you look forward, John and Shannon, that might be something to.
Yeah, I think it would be good to have, to sit down with the financial systems and have this conversation, right? Like if we have this opportunity coming with FireCode, where we know we're going to be doing a technical refresh, it's on the horizon, right? Like this is the time to go back and reassess whether or not something has changed somewhere, that we've been functioning under a state that was 20 years old and maybe we have better opportunity. And I think, Steve's point in the chat, that because this all, so I got here in 2004, so for the first fire code was in 2005. So, yeah, it's been a while. But my understanding was always that fire code was intended to be used by federal and non-federal partners to, at the end of the day, be able to actually get true costs for an incident, right? And so I don't know that we've fully met that, and maybe that's not as important as we thought it was at that point in time, but it probably would be good to kind of document and define that a little bit. And then I think too, that we probably should, I think IBC is probably the business steward for fire code. And so Dave, as the chair, we should probably look at, 2003. Yeah, I thought it started. Yeah, okay. So 2003 started in 04. I think that maybe there's, I think about what you did, Gina and Kara with unit IDs, right? So just getting that PMS out, and really, you guys did such a good job in really describing intended use and some of the complexity and how to account for that, right? I mean, maybe we need to have something that is a little more detailed reference for fire code, so that we have something to go back to, so that we can all go, oh yeah, this is what we've agreed on, instead of going, well, I think I remember it like this, right? So those are probably some opportunities for us.
And we know, right, different regions within the Forest Service take the user guide and alter it a little bit for their needs. Now we have inconsistency, right?
No, well, that will be another issue.
Yeah.
So I want to see, let me see who's first. Cole and then Dave.
Oh yeah, and mine is a pretty small comment. I know there's other issues going on here, but this kind of goes back to, if I'm wrong, tell me, Rochelle, but some of those conversations we tried to have with aviation cost in the financial systems, and just not being well integrated or understanding how or who to talk to, and those connections that aren't more technical rather than manual. And we struggled with that on that call, that we couldn't make a lot of headway with how to really integrate these things better. And I feel like this is a similar discussion to that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is a relationship, and I maybe Forest Service has that all lined out, working really slick, but I know on the DOI side, it is like the processes that they go through to try and align invoices and get things paid, and make sure that the resource actually showed up on the incident that they had a record for, or that they get an invoice from vendor and they don't know what fire it was, and it just sounds incredibly painful. So I think we could probably use that as leverage to have a conversation and say, hey, if we can kind of figure this out, maybe we can help with some of those processes on your end as well.
Yeah, that's been a goal, right, for a long time, to sort of integrate.
Yeah. Dave?
Yeah, so back to your point, your question, your thing about fire code and having it so that we could get a true cost for all the fires. Fire code created the mechanism to be able to get true cost, because then you have a single code. You could ask all people who responded to the fire, what was your cost of this fire? So it was a mechanism to get there. It wasn't supposed to be the answer. But just my comment to that part of the conversation. The other thing, didn't we do or at least start a study about trying to define or look at fire code as what it is, where it should go? Did that just die? Because if we're going to talk about trying to define the purpose of fire code, it seems to me we started down that road and then it died.
Yeah, I think Laura referenced
2017.
2017. Yeah. So,
Granted, I had a different mindset back then. I was totally against it. So I have kind of come around to where I think it's a good idea. So, whether that helps or not, at least my mind's changed.
yeah, so maybe So maybe what we should do is go back, and a group of us sit down and so Dave, that's probably you and Cole and I and Laura to start with, and kind of think about how we want to do that and get some folks together, go over the report, the MBS report from 2017, see if there are some potential opportunities to better define something based on what we understand today, because I know even the way I think about things, some things have changed in the last 6 months, right? Or the last 2 days. So it's probably good to kind of look at it from today's perspective and see what that might look like.
Yeah, and-
So let's do that. Let's take that as an action item, and Colin, I'll follow up with that through the NWCG committee processes.
Can I have one more thought though?
Yeah.
So the other thing though, I think it is important to try and get the financial systems community involved at some point. But I think it kind of depends on how that interaction goes, because there's a connection, but I don't know if there's enough connection with FireCode to that we can be one all-inclusive scenario, because you've got, even though we have one system for the department, the 4 bureaus were allowed to do things differently by time they came on board. So all 4 bureaus have different coding structures. And then you got Forest Service, who has a totally different structure. So it's kind of beyond getting people to talk. There might be some really behind the scenes stuff that has to happen and create a reporting tool if we truly want total cost of fires. Just my 2 cents worth.
Okay. All right. Well, let's, I appreciate you getting on with this, Dave, and having this opportunity to think about this and talk about it, right? I mean, this is really an exercise that we're going to have to do for,
So just go back and forth about which one was first.
I know. 15 minutes.
Awesome.
2023, see, he said 2023, so he's looking into the future.
Yeah. So, okay, geekery at play. But I think that this is part of what we have to start thinking about as a culture, that when these opportunities for technical refreshes come up, that we need to take advantage of that, and we need to be thinking about it far enough ahead of time that we can go, okay, well, within the context of our environment today, what are the opportunities, and validate the assumptions that we used when we created something, 10 and 20 years ago, right? Because things change.
And ask those people what their pain points are, right?
Yeah.
Been doing a lot of work with California and issues, concerns that they have with financial systems and incidents, and relating the incidents, so they can figure out where their financial obligations lie, et cetera. And if they're having those questions, everybody's having those questions, right? It's not, It's not a unique situation. And so really listening and
And I think the other thing is, so, we finalized the fire cause standard a couple of years ago, right? And now CEPC has come back to DMC, and we're gonna, and I've asked the fire reporting subcommittee to engage on this, that we've been using this, right? And we're seeing some things that we didn't expect. And so we're gonna go back and look at that. And so that's only 2 years. But what happens is, and we found this with Irwin, like the forest task group, right? We developed all these standards, and it was like awesome theory, right? But when you actually start implementing and using it, then you go, oh, wait, we missed something, or we need to shift something, right? And so we should look at these as opportunities, and not that it's wrong, right? We just get to learn. And the more that we allow ourselves to learn and flex like that, the faster and better we'll get to where we actually want to be. So.
We just add to that in the cadence from which we don't have to wait. Like they said, let's ask again, right? They came and said, let's do it. And so even with the event type category, there's things that come up since that changed. It's like, we probably need to look at adding at least either another event type category or a relationship behind it. So I think it's not
we're just learning.
When you get to ask, those things come up. be able to mainly adjust to those.
Yeah.